Hello, I'm Kilpo1, and welcome to another The Forever Winter video. Today, we'll be going over each weapon in the game, how they feel, and how they compare against each other. Let's first go over our different categories of how we will compare these guns. Firing modes. These can be semi-burst and automatic, and when a firearm has all three modes, it will be abbreviated as S, B, and A. Rounds a minute. This is the firearm's rounds per minute. Notably, this excludes reload time. Capacity. How many rounds a firearm can hold, with its upgraded capacity being in parentheses. Silencer. Can a firearm natively support a silencer? If requiring any upgrades first, this will say upgraded. Optic. Can a firearm natively support an optic? If requiring any upgrades first, this will say upgraded. For these next four items, these are all subjective fields. That being, these are how these weapons feel to me and are not easily quantified. ADS recoil. The amount of recoil a firearm has when aiming down sights, being ranked from low, being little to no recoil and being easily controlled, moderate, having decent amount of recoil and still being controllable, and high, being borderline uncontrollable to uncontrollable recoil. ADS alignment. How well aligned the sights are. At the moment, most iron sights and optics have a decent amount of deviation from the point of aim. This is ranked in the categories of poor, fair, and good, with poor having extreme deviations, fair being decent amount of deviation, and good being little to no deviation. Third person shake. The amount of visual screen shake when firing this weapon in third person, being ranked from low to moderate to high. Third person bloom. The amount of bloom a firearm has in third person aiming mode. This is effectively the firearm's minute of angle, or the cone in which a firearm's projectile can land around the point of aim. Procurement. How to acquire the firearm. This will primarily be Grillo or Aramaki, though some firearms can be only obtained through quests, and several only by more obscure means. Now, let's head over to our first category, pistols. The pistols category currently has 8 firearms, with them being predominantly in either 9mm or 45 ACP, and there is one firearm for the .357 Magnum caliber and one for the 40mm HE round. Pistols can be equipped to all characters except for Bagman, and most can be acquired through traders except for the M79, which can be acquired by the aerial scavenge quest from the Europa faction. Now, let's head over to our first pistol, the 87 Target. The 87 Target is a semi-automatic pistol in 9mm. It has a moderate capacity of 12 rounds that can be eventually upgraded to 15 rounds, and can natively equip both a silencer and an optic, making it one of the few pistols able to do so without upgrades. It has decent handling characteristics outside of the amount of screen shake when firing in third person, and its biggest sin is that it's chambered in 9mm. 9mm currently has an in-game damage value of 110 per shot, making it feel anemic without automatic fire and a large magazine. Let's move over to our next pistol, the C96. The C96. This is another pistol in 9mm, with its real only positive differentiation over the 87 Target being its burst mode. It has similar handling to the 87 Target, with a worse magazine capacity, the inability to equip a silencer, and requiring an upgrade before being able to outfit an optic. Its one saving characteristic is that it's quite aesthetically pleasing, though it is advisable to stay away from this pistol unless your goal is to decorate the local trench line with your corpse. The Glock 19 might be the best pistol in the game. It's still chambered in the fairly anemic 9mm round, doing only a meager 110 damage, but the Glock shines in its sheer amount of modifications and its full auto fire mode. Fully upgraded, a Glock can have a silencer, optic, and a 50-round magazine, giving you what is effectively a pocket SMG. Its handling characteristics aren't terrible either, with it really only suffering the severe amounts of third-person shake it seems most other pistols suffer from. It's unfortunate that our time with the Glock now has to end, because now I have to talk about the worst pistol in the game, the R8. The R8 is our first and only revolver in the game. It's chambered in .357 Magnum with an 8-round capacity. It has only a moderate amount of damage increase over the 9mm, unable to meet any real damage threshold over its smaller counterpart. While it can natively support a silencer, using this silencer will block off your iron sights, effectively limiting you to third-person firing mode. Without any substantial damage increase over 9mm and its 8-round capacity, this wheelgun is best left for cowboy roleplay enthusiasts. The SOG is our first .45 caliber pistol. As we'll see in our other examples of .45 caliber weapons, these come with a hefty 200 damage per shot, meeting a significant damage threshold. These rounds will one-shot almost all light infantry with a headshot, unlike the weaker pistol cartridges. The SOG has only an 8-round capacity, with no ability to equip a silencer, and requiring an upgrade to support an optic. Despite all of these downsides, its 200 damage makes it feel better than most other pistols. Now on to the bigger brother to the SOG, the USP. The USP is essentially just a direct upgrade over the SOG, with a larger capacity and better handling. It still has the exceptional 200 damage of 45 ACP, and is much easier to shoot in third person. It has no silencer currently, and requires an upgrade for an optic. One feature of the USP is that it's the only regular pistol obtainable by quests, allowing us to acquire many of these pistols without needing Grillo or to spend credits. Our next pistol references Baba Yaga, which is certainly what every enemy will feel like if you use this next pistol. The Viper is a 9mm pistol with a respectable capacity of 17 rounds, though its inability to be modified in any way means no silencer, no optic, and all of the shortcomings of 9mm. It is advisable to leave this Baba Yaga in the closet or under the bed. Next up is the M79, a pistol grenade launcher. The M79. This pistol gives the classes that do not have access to a normal grenade launcher the ability to fire the 40mm HE projectile. This round does a massive 1000 damage on impact, and then follows up with an explosion which starts at 10,000 damage, but quickly tapers off to 1000 damage at its 7.5 meter radius. While this pistol grenade launcher provides incredible burst damage, its single shot capacity will have you constantly reloading to down tough foes, making you vulnerable for an extended period of time. Lastly, the M79 is a quest-only drop, obtainable through the aerial scavenge quest from Europa. With this being the last of our pistols, let's go over our tier list for these pistols. In our A bracket, the Glock stands alone, it being highly customizable and its 50-round drum making up for its rather weak 9mm round, giving you what might be one of the better 9mm SMGs in the game. In the B bracket, we have the M79 and USP. The M79 fulfills a niche role here for the non-grenade launcher classes, but can occasionally be a liability with its constant reloading. The USP is the best of the 45 pistols, making it well above the rest because of it meeting the damage threshold for one-shot headshots. In the C bracket, we have pistols generally lacking in some regard, whether it be the SOG with its poor capacity, or the 87 Target and Viper with their poor damage. Lastly, in the D bracket, we have the C96, it being here for its low capacity, damage, and no silencer, and the R8 just for being atrocious all around. Finishing pistols, let's move over to our next category, SMGs. The SMG category. There are currently 8 of these in the game in either 45 ACP, 5.7mm, and 9mm, and are usable by all characters except for Old Man and Bagman. All SMGs are acquirable through either Grillo or Aramaki, except for the PM9, which must be acquired by either your donation box or a reported very small chance of being acquirable through a gacha container. Let's go ahead and take a look at our first and my least favorite SMG, the APC-9 Pro. The APC-9 Pro is an SMG chambered in 9mm, having all 3 firing modes with a moderate rate of fire. The best aspect of the APC-9 Pro is that it can both support a silencer and an optic natively, but its minuscule capacity with no room for upgrades makes reloading a constant burden when in combat, and often a liability. All of this, with its rather large amount of third-person bloom, has me staying well away from this SMG. The Vector is our first 45 caliber SMG. It supports all 3 fire modes with a moderate rate of fire. The Vector appears to have an integrated suppressor, but it currently does not function as one. It can natively support an optic and has good handling attributes across the board, along with a mostly aligned ADS, a rarity for most guns. As with the 45 caliber pistols, the 200 damage of this Vector makes it great for quickly mowing down infantry, and can be even used against Exos in a pinch. The Vector is a very strong contender for the best SMG, and I can easily see that being the case with a future fix for the suppressor or any magazine upgrades. The P90 is the only weapon currently in the game that uses the 5.7mm cartridge. It has the same damage of 9mm, though in the P90 package it comes with, it has a default capacity of 50 rounds, making this P90 better than most stock SMGs. While it cannot support a silencer, the amount of 5.7mm you'll pick up throughout your time in the Forever Winter makes this gun worth running occasionally, though it falls well behind many SMGs. The PM9 is our first hard to obtain weapon. This item can only be obtained through a small chance of your donation box daily, with a reported very small chance of being attainable through gachas, though I cannot personally verify the gacha claim. It has only semi and automatic modes of fire with an upgraded capacity of 50 rounds. It can also support a silencer once you obtain the higher level barrels. It also has a fairly decent handling characteristic, with low amounts of third-person shake making this gun quite controllable. When fully upgraded, the PM9 may be the best 9mm SMG, but the difficulty of acquiring this weapon makes it hard to consistently rely upon. The PP19 is our Glock of the SMGs, having very high amounts of customization. It's chambered in 9mm and has an upgraded magazine capacity of 45 rounds. It needs upgrades to equip both a silencer and optic, but these can be obtained quite early in its leveling track. Its low amounts of shake and recoil make this gun very controllable, though it has a decent amount of bloom. The PP19 is a very solid all-around 9mm SMG, especially when unlocking most of its customization. Though, if its moderate fire rate is having you feeling somewhat anemic, let's move over to the bullet hose, the PPSH. The PPSH, for the most part, is a fun weapon as opposed to an effective one. It recently got buffed to have a higher rate of fire, letting you dump your 35 rounds of 9mm downrange in record time. This version of the PPSH has already been somewhat modernized, letting you fit an optic and numerous other modifications to it. However, it does not have the ability to equip a silencer. Its high rate of fire, along with its max capacity of 35 rounds and high amounts of recoil, means you can quickly empty your magazine downrange, though if you hit anything is another story entirely. Next up might just be one of the best stock weapons in the game, the Spectre M4. Despite the nomenclature of M4 having you leaning toward a 5.56 rifle, the Spectre M4 is a rather bare-bones SMG in .45 caliber. The Spectre's best attribute is its capacity, letting you bring 50 rounds of .45 immediately upon acquiring it, and better yet, it can natively equip a silencer. This gun is best fired in third-person mode, as its iron sights exist, but its ability to chew through almost anything you put in front of it makes up for its optical inadequacies. While the Spectre might be the clear favorite stat-wise, this next little guy has some aesthetic charm. The WLT MPL is not winning any award for being effective, but boy does that thing look diesel punk pretty. This SMG is a 9mm stamped gun with a low rate of fire, a max capacity of 30 rounds, and no modifications. All of these make it objectively one of the worst SMGs, but I find myself still looking at it, admiring its beauty. Anyway, on to the SMG tier list. Coming in at the top of the A bracket of SMGs, we have the Spectre M4. With its ability to mow down squads with its suppressed 50 rounds of .45 ACP, this SMG rises well above the rest. In our B bracket, we have the Vector, that's here for its lack of suppressor and limited magazine, while the PM9 and PP19 are fairly equivalent, with both of their sins being their 9mm nature and requiring upgrades to fully unlock their potential. In our C bracket, we have the P90, with its inability to be silenced, the PPSH falling here for the same sin, and the MPL, which is only here so its beauty is not tarnished by being in the same bracket as the APC-9 Pro. The APC-9 Pro gets a silencer and an optic, so why is it D tier? The combo of both being a weak caliber along with 20 rounds is awful. Sure, you can suppress your weapon, but with only 20 rounds, you will often find yourself having to reload before taking out a squad, and this makes it the worst SMG in my book. Now let's move on to shotguns. The shotgun category. There are currently 5 shotguns in the game, all chambered in 12 gauge and are available to all characters. These shotguns currently shoot 20 pellets per shot, with each pellet doing 100 damage before any mods. This makes shotguns do insane amounts of damage against vehicles, as you are likely to land all of your pellets doing a massive 2k damage per shot, and while this is currently the case at the moment of posting this video, it should be expected for this to change in the near future. These shotguns have a wide variety of procurement methods, along with the Vepr 12 being the hardest weapon in the game to currently obtain, but more on that later. Let's go ahead and jump over to the AA-12. The AA-12 is an automatic shotgun. At its base, it holds 8 rounds, but with an upgrade it can hold the largest number of shells currently in the game, at 32. This, along with the current damage shotguns do against vehicles, means the AA-12 is a very effective exo killer, being able to consistently kill exos in one magazine. It cannot support a silencer or optic and has fair handling characteristics, and can occasionally be acquired in the destroyed or disabled state from your Asian officers. The S12 is a slight upgrade over the Surplus shotgun, especially when you start unlocking a few of its mods. It's a semi-auto with a 6 shell capacity at first, but eventually able to go up to 9 shells. With its low rate of fire, it makes the recoil of this gun quite manageable. The S12 cannot support an optic or silencer, and while can be bought from Grillo, this weapon consistently drops from many Europa forces. The Surplus shotgun is a default weapon, being an all-around solid backup weapon to your primary. Being a default weapon, it has no customization, but with a 5 shell capacity, this Surplus shotgun is great in a pinch. Much like the S12, its low rate of fire means its ADS recoil is quite manageable, basically resetting after each shot. All in all, the Surplus shotgun is one of my go-to backup weapons, and for good reason. The USAS 12 is another automatic shotgun. It functions basically the same as the AA-12, but with a max capacity of 20 rounds. The one advantage the USAS has over the AA-12 is the ability to eventually upgrade its barrel, giving a slight damage boost going from 100 to 102 damage per pellet. One of the major differences of the USAS in comparison to the AA-12 is its procurement method, requiring to be either obtained from quests or gacha boxes. The large loot box is exclusively on Scorched Enclave. Lastly, much like the AA-12, the USAS cannot support an optic or silencer. The Vepr 12 is by far the hardest to obtain weapon in the game, with the only way to obtain this weapon is to get very lucky with your daily donation box. This automatic shotgun functions much like the AA-12 in USAS, with a default 10 round capacity and an upgraded 25 round capacity. Its big difference over these other auto shotties is its mod slots, with the ability to equip things like a foregrip, optic, and flashlight. It also has very low amounts of ADS recoil in comparison to the other shotguns, making it much easier to shoot while in this mode. Now, let's go over our shotgun tier list. In our A bracket, we have the AA-12, with its 32 round capacity, making it an absolute beast upon the battlefield, able to consistently fell exos without even having to reload. Next up in our B bracket, we have the 2 other auto shotties, both respectable, but just a tiny bit worse in comparison to the AA-12. Lastly, in our C bracket, we have our 2 semi-automatic shotguns. While these are worse than auto shotguns, both of these shotguns are still quite respectable, and I would take them over almost all pistols and most SMGs. Next up is our most diverse weapon group, rifles. The rifle category contains the most weapons in the game, with its current count being 11, excluding heavy rifles. Rifles also have the widest range of ammunition types, mostly in the intermediate cartridge sizes, though it also has the 12.7mm subsonic round. Rifles are currently usable by all characters, and can be obtained through either Grillo or Aramaki. Lastly, for many instances in the rifle section, we will have 2 damage numbers, with the first damage number being its stock data mine damage, and the damage number in parentheses being what the default weapon currently does in game. This is currently due to the stock weapon being sold often having a modification already that increases damage at the cost of some other attribute. The AK currently in game is the AK-74 in the 5.45 intermediate cartridge. It is a heavily customizable rifle with the ability to equip a 100 round magazine, though is much more likely to be the 95 round drum, as the 100 round drum is quite rare. Its 5.45 round has a baseline damage of 150, though the default AK seems to have upgrades to bring this up to 165 per shot. It has fairly good handling attributes, which are very necessary as you'll often be operating this AK in fully automatic mode, as it's below the threshold to eliminate infantry with 1 headshot. As we'll be seeing with other Yorusuke rifles, it can be acquired from the Aramaki vendor. The G36 is a full auto rifle in 5.56. It has the same output of damage as a 5.45 round, being 150, and has a baseline capacity of 30 rounds, and an upgraded magazine size of 40 rounds. It has good handling characteristics, and can natively support a silencer and optic with no additional upgrades, this being one of its nicer features. Unfortunately, its similar damage profile and small capacity relative to its peers has the G36 feeling underwhelming. The M4A1 is a much better contender as best rifle in comparison to the G36, as it operates the same 5.56 round and has the customization suit to bring it better in line with the AK. It has an upgradable magazine that goes up to 60 rounds, and its faster rate of fire means it can put out much more lead downrange in a hurry, giving it a decent trade-off to the higher capacity AK. Its good handling characteristics and ability to natively support a silencer, optic, and its plentiful other upgrades make the M4A1 one of, if not the best rifle for the 5.56 cartridge. The M16 is another 5.56 rifle, and is a direct downgrade of the M4. It still has all 3 fire modes, with a slightly reduced rounds per minute. The real downside of the M16 is its much smaller capacity, along with its inability to support a suppressor. One potential upside of this rifle in the near future is it does seem to have the potential of being outfitted with an M203 underbarrel grenade launcher, though this is currently non-functional. The R11 is our first .308 rifle, having a slight damage increase over the smaller cartridges in the AK and the M4. It has a high amount of customization and can natively support a silencer and optic. .308 still being under the 200 damage floor for consistent one-shot headshots means that this rifle feels underwhelming in its current state, requiring multiple shots to down most foes. It also has relatively poor handling with high amounts of third-person shake and bloom. One other downside of the .308 cartridge is that its procurement can be problematic, as it has a relatively low per vendor reset at 250 rounds. There's a lot of potential for the R11, with changes to the .308 round, or perhaps barrel damage increases in the future, but for right now the rifle is quite bad. The RPK is our first 7.62 rifle. While 7.62 has a baseline damage of 175, the RPK seems to come default from the vendor with several upgrades that improves its damage to 224. This, along with having a max capacity 100 rounds, with 95 being much more common, has this rifle quickly role-playing as an LMG. It can natively support a silencer and with an upgrade in optic. And while its handling attributes do require some effort to control, the reward for doing so is massive, as this weapon shreds through most infantry, while consistently stagger locking the rest. The SA-58 is another rifle chambered in .308 like the R11. It, for all intents and purposes, is just a direct upgrade over the R11, with a larger capacity, similar modifications, and much better handling characteristics. This is by far the best .308 rifle in the game. However, its prime weakness is once again the relative difficulty in acquiring .308, with a single vendor reset feeling insufficient for any serious combat. The Surplus rifle is the default rifle available to all characters at the start of the game. It is essentially an AK-74U chambered in 5.45 with an unchangeable loadout of a 10-round magazine and a red dot optic. It has a very limited rate of fire, but does have decent handling characteristics. Surprisingly, this isn't the worst rifle, but as far as Surplus weapons go, the Surplus shotgun is much better. While the R11 could be considered our first DMR, currently it is only the SVD that fulfills that role. It is the only weapon in the game that uses the 54R cartridge, and comes with a hefty 300 damage, ensuring that you can one-tap headshot all but the heaviest infantry. Its 10-round capacity does mean you need to land your shots, but are rewarded for doing so unlike other weaker cartridges. The biggest sin of the SVD is that it takes a while to unlock its rail upgrade, meaning you'll be using irons for a while. The TKB is a weird 5.45 rifle. It has the baseline damage of that round at 150 and has no current modifications. It has a capacity of 30 rounds and fairly decent handling, making this weapon feel like a standard issue rifle of someone. But at the moment, it seems no units use this weapon, and can only be acquired through Aramaki. Because of this, the weapon as a whole is rather underwhelming, though I can't help but find its simplistic nature and aesthetic quite charming. Much like the MPL for SMGs, it's objectively not very good, but I can find it aesthetically quite pleasing, and much more fitting with the theme of the game over other weaponry. The VKS. Where do I begin? Just no. No. Yes, I know you have a lot of 12.7 in your inventory. Yes, I know its handling looks good. And yes, I know it can support a silencer and an optic. But do you remember the issue with the R8? Small magazines and the ability to not one-shot do not work. And this is the R8 on steroids. You will be reloading this gun more than shooting it, for the brief amount of time you're alive before getting mauled by cyborgs. Now, let's just move on to the rifle tier list. At the top in the A bracket, we have the RPK, M4, and AK, all up here for their massive amounts of customization and being the best in their respective cartridges. Often I will find myself cycling between these three weapons, as the amount of each cartridge I have in storage waxes and wanes. In the B bracket, we have the SVD being the best DMR, but often requiring a backup weapon in some capacity to make up for its shortfall in dealing with CQB situations. The SA-58 is also here, being the best .308 weapon in the game, but is hamstrung by the cartridge's availability. In our C bracket, we have the middling rifles, the G36, M16, TKB, and R11. These weapons all suffer from lackluster capacity, upgrades, or just being inferior versions of other weapons. Lastly, in our D bracket, we have the Surplus rifle, which honestly should never be brought when the Surplus shotgun exists, and the VKS, which should require no further explanation. With the rifles now complete, let's move on to their heavier cousins, the heavy rifles. The heavy rifle category. There are currently 4 of these in the game, mostly chambered in 50 caliber, with 1 in 20mm. Most of these weapons are currently only attainable through in-game quests, with the Scar being the only exception otherwise. Lastly, these weapons see our first heavy restriction on which characters can wield them, as natively only Old Man and Bagman can wield these weapons, with Masked Man requiring training before being able to use them. Now, let's move over to our first heavy rifle, the 36M. The 36M is a 20mm anti-tank rifle, acquirable through Memento Part 3 of the Europa faction. While its advertised damage in game is 1000, this value is incorrect, as this rifle does currently a massive 2000 damage per shot. It has a low RPM at only 45 and has no support for a silencer, and only has an integrated optic that cannot be changed, though this integrated optic is quite accurate in comparison to most others in the game. However, one interesting perk about this rifle that makes it quite stealthy is that when you one-shot infantry, they do not immediately alert their squad like a non-lethal shot would do. The squad will still react to the sound of the weapon being fired, but with this weapon's damage, you can quickly eliminate an entire squad before they are alerted to your presence and begin firing upon you. The GM6 is a 50 caliber heavy rifle. Much like the 36M, it does a fair bit more damage than currently advertised in game, with 1100 per shot. It is a semi-auto rifle with a 5-round capacity and able to outfit a wide range of optics, unlike the 36M. The quest to obtain this weapon can be a bit problematic, with only Avenge the Fallen from Europa currently being completable. I find it a bit dysfunctional because of its relative low rate of fire, feeling inaccurate to how the gun should operate, especially in comparison to our next gun, the NWT-20. The NWT-20 is another 50 caliber heavy rifle. Like the GM6, it has 1100 damage per shot, while currently only being advertised at 800. Both of the quests for this item are completable, with Call of the Herd being quite an easy quest to complete on most if not all maps. It has an integrated scope that feels quite accurate and cannot support a silencer. Unlike the GM6, this weapon looks and feels the part of a bolt-action sniper rifle, while the GM6 feels like a semi-automatic with an overly restricted rate of fire. So while these two weapons are very similar, I much prefer the aesthetic of the NWT-20. Our last heavy rifle is the Scar, chambered in 50 caliber. This monstrosity is quite an effective firearm once you get up to its larger capacity magazines, but feels abysmal until then. With 200 damage per shot, it never really quite feels like you're firing a 50 BMG, especially in comparison to its other heavy rifle brothers, but it does feel quite satisfactory in full auto with a large magazine. The Scar does not currently have a silencer, however it does have an entire barrel upgrade that looks to be integrally suppressed, but does not currently function in-game as a suppressor. It can natively equip an optic and has fair handling characteristics. Now, let's go over to our heavy rifle tier list. At the top in the A bracket, we have the 36M, with its massive 2000 damage and stealthy nature making it the king of heavy rifles. Next up in the B bracket, we have the NWT-20, which is a solid anti-material sniper rifle that just feels satisfying to use. In our C bracket, we have the Scar, which mainly suffers from an absolutely horrific leveling experience one has to go through with its default 8-round magazines, and what feels like an underpowered cartridge in comparison to its 50 caliber brothers. Lastly, in our D bracket, we have the GM6, and while this is basically an NWT-20, it is much harder to acquire due to quest differences, and feels mechanically wrong due to its severely limited rate of fire. Next up, light machine guns. There are currently 4 different LMGs in the game, in 7 different calibers, those being 308, 7.62, and 5.56. These LMGs are currently usable by only 2 of the characters, that being Masked Man and Bagman, though Masked Man does require training before being able to use them. There are currently no quests for LMGs, with all but one of them being obtainable via Grillo or Aramaki. Let's move over to our first LMG, the M60. The M60 is our first LMG and is chambered in the 308 cartridge. It has the standard damage of 308 being 175, and has a 100 round capacity that cannot be upgraded, and can support a silencer. Outside of this silencer, the weapon has little to no mod slots, including no ability to upgrade the optic, though surprisingly it has very usable iron sights, but can be somewhat hard to control. Much like the other 308 weaponry, one of the biggest issues with the M60 is the availability of its ammo. The MG34 is another LMG chambered in 308. It has the standard 308 damage and has a max capacity of 75 rounds. While this LMG can support an optic unlike the M60, it has incredibly poor handling characteristics, having high recoil, relatively poor sight alignment, and insane amounts of third-person shake. All of these downsides add up and make the MG34 rather ineffective, not even including the shortage of 308 ammo. The RPD is our only LMG chambered in 7.62. though it shares similar attributes to the 308 caliber LMGs outside of ammo scarcity. It has an unchangeable 75 round drum with no optical rail and can natively support a suppressor. It has relatively poor handling attributes and limited mod slots. The RPD is one of the 3 current weapons in the game that are not obtainable via vendor or quest. It can only really be acquired through picking up a destroyed or disabled version of this weapon in raid with a gunrunner rig, with it most often being dropped by Uresca infantry. Unfortunately, in a direct comparison to the RPK, this weapon feels incredibly lackluster and is best left on the ground. The SAW is by far the best LMG in the game. It uses the 5.56 cartridge, and while it has middling damage of only 150 a shot, it can natively support a suppressor and an optic, and comes stock with a 200 round magazine, which can be upgraded later to a 300 round magazine. This gives the SAW insane amounts of sustained firepower, enough to solve almost any problem. Its handling isn't terrible either, being much more controllable than all other LMGs, able to give sustained accurate fire over an extended period. While not nearly as bad as 308, 5.56 can be accrued fairly decently between vendor resets and occasional drops by Europa troops, though heavy use of the SAW will quickly find you draining your reserves. With our LMGs covered, let's go ahead and rank them in a tier list. In our A bracket we have the SAW, it being the best compromise of damage capacity and controllability. In our B bracket we have the M60, with a good capacity and is fairly controllable, with its biggest sin being the rarity of 308. In the C bracket we have the RPD, with its status of being an in-raid pickup only and a direct downgrade when compared to the RPK, it makes the RPD widely irrelevant. Lastly, we have the MG34, with its small capacity for an LMG and its terrible handling characteristics, landing it deservedly in the D bracket. There are currently only 2 non-pistol grenade launchers in the game, that being the self-titled grenade launcher and the XM25. The regular grenade launcher can be acquired by Grillo or by Quest, and the XM25 is only available via Quest. This weapon group can be used by either Masked Man or Bagman, but both require training before being able to use these weapons. This weapon group and the preceding weapon group will not have a tier list, but will just instead be direct comparisons. Let's move on to our first grenade launcher. Our first grenade launcher is just titled Grenade Launcher. It fires a 40mm projectile that does 2 different sets of damage. It does an initial 1000 damage impact, and then the secondary explosion does 10,000 damage at its center, which tapers off to 1000 at the outer edge of its 7.5 meter radius. It has a capacity of 6, which is enough to down an EXO with direct hits, but be mindful as its relatively low rate of fire will have you under return fire before being able to burst it down, so it's advisable to do so from cover. Out of all 3 grenade launchers, including the pistol, this is by far the easiest to acquire, being purchasable from Grollo. The XM25 is our other grenade launcher, having the same damage model as the prior grenade launcher. Its main downside over the previous grenade launcher being its reduced capacity of 4 rounds, and its relatively poor sight picture. Both of these grenade launchers fulfill their role, but the regular grenade launcher is a much better option for now. Now, let's move on to our last category, the heavy machine gun. The heavy machine gun category. There is currently only one heavy machine gun in the game, the 50 caliber Painless. This weapon can only be equipped by Bagman, and the only way to acquire this weapon is currently through the quest Hostile Expungement by the Eurasia faction. This quest is quite easy to complete and can be done on almost any map. Let's go ahead and break down the details of Painless. Painless is a 50 caliber chain gun, able to dish out these rounds at a staggering 2400 rounds per minute. In addition to this, Painless also does 50% more damage than advertised in game, with the actual damage per shot being 300. It has no mod slots and no real ADS, solely relying upon surprisingly accurate, though occasionally tough to control third-person aiming. This makes Painless an extremely satisfying gun to use, as you can mow down almost everything in your path, including EXOs within one magazine. The one downside of this weapon is the plentiful amounts of 50 cal you need to bring along with you to make full use of Painless, taking up precious space inside of your containers. However, as this can only be wielded by Bagman, he has plenty of space to spare between his large rigs and carry capacity increases. Lastly, by far, 50 cal is the most ubiquitous ammo in the game currently, and is easily farmable off Europa troops, making restocking ammo for this weapon painless. Let's move on to our last section, my personal favorite and hated weapons. In my favorite section, we have the RPK, Painless, the Spectre M4, and the NWT-20. The RPK is the pinnacle of all rifles, perfectly balancing capacity, damage, and has decent handling and relatively accurate sights. Painless is just an incredibly fun to use weapon, and it's a nice change of pace as you can just run around the map mowing down everything with reckless abandon. The Spectre M4 by far feels like the best SMG, having a good aesthetic for the setting while also being an effective weapon for its role. Lastly, the NWT-20 is just an incredibly satisfying gun to use. It one-taps most enemies, especially if you land a headshot, and provides a satisfying thunk every time you do so. Moving over to the hate section, we have the VKS, R11, APC-9 Pro, GM6, and pistols. The VKS doesn't need any reason outside of its abhorrent capacity and damage. The R11 feels incredibly unaesthetic for the setting, along with having quite poor handling for what should be a DMR. The APC-9 Pro is an incredibly ineffective SMG, and is outclassed by even the surplus shotgun, invalidating any reason to bring this into raid. The GM6, while basically being the same stat-wise to the NWT, just feels wrong. Maybe it's still a work in progress, but right now, its aesthetic does not match the setting, and its mechanics just feel weird. Lastly is the entire pistols category, even the beloved Glock. As of right now, I cannot see a reason why you would go out of your way to wield any of these over the surplus shotgun. And this basically invalidates the entire weapon tray. Hopefully we'll see some changes in the future, but as of right now, their relative uselessness lands them quite squarely in my hated section. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. It not only helps me, but helps the algorithm.